Converted man here. Hi. Was that annoying? Good. All right. Here's a TFP Student Action not proving a damn thing about anything, let alone God. Here we go.
Well, I don't believe in God. You don't believe in God. So you came out of nothing. 100. Well,
Atheist.
So you don't believe in God. So you came out of nothing. 100. Wait, no, that's not what I thought you were going to say. You caught somebody off guard. Clever. No, nobody thinks that we came from nothing. That's not a stance that atheists have. Your cherry-picked quote from a campus pastor is unconvincing. This is some evangel going to somebody completely unprepared and presenting a false dichotomy. Not very good starting off your video here.
Atheists are strange. They claim that the belief in God is illogical.
I don't necessarily claim that the belief in God is illogical, per se, but it depends on a variety of factors. Belief is understandable given that we are social creatures. We're evolved to conform. We're evolved to follow the pack. We're evolved in certain ways that make sense of our behavior. So it is understandable why people would believe in stories told by others, stories that are in religion as well. And so the belief of God can be understood through that methodology. And it's a logical chain of events that leads to that. But that doesn't mean you have a logical argument for God. That's something completely else entirely.
However, they fail to see that the Catholic Church uses both faith and reason.
I don't care what the Catholic Church uses. I do care that they have yet to really fully, in my view, apologize for hiding all those pedophiles. You know, and as far as I know, they're still doing that. And also, they've never excommunicated Hitler, as far as I know. So, you know, go ahead and fix those things and let me know when you do it. And also, I don't really like the Catholic Church in general, just broadly speaking. But no, you don't use reason because reason is the opposite of faith.
To understand the existence of God. St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest minds in history.
The greatest minds in history is St. Thomas Aquinas. Your bar must be set extraordinarily low to be able to say that. I don't know. I think Einstein kind of wins that. If anyone's going to win the smartest person in history, it's got to be Einstein.
Gives us 5 proofs for God's existence.
No, he gives you 5 arguments for God's existence.
If you watch this video to the end, you'll be prepared to defend the faith and maybe even convert an atheist.
No, you'll be able to copy and paste the argument, but you won't be able to defend your faith because faith is undefendable. Faith is a belief without any basis in anything other than feeling and desire. As far as converting an atheist, no, you can't do that unless you had empirical evidence or repeatable tests, and you guys don't have that. If you had a sound argument, that might convince us to look into the matter, but you don't have sound arguments either.
As Isaac Newton observed, a man who thinks half-heartedly will not believe in God, but a man who truly thinks has to believe in God.
So what? I don't care what he said. cherry picking quotes from various famous dead people doesn't mean anything to me at all. I could find somebody that said that God doesn't exist and that believing in God is foolish. That doesn't prove anything.
First proof, motion.
A little put off about fighting back against your liberal professor. How do you know your professor's liberal? Whatever.
Have you ever watched dominoes fall? What caused the last domino in the series to fall?
Gravity.
The logical answer is the one before.
No. The correct answer is gravity. I mean, that's what made it able to fall. But the last domino might have fallen because of wind, not necessarily because the other domino pushed it. So you're already wrong.
And if I asked you what knocked that domino down, you would say the one before it, and so on. Eventually, you would trace it back to the first domino, which caused all the other dominoes to fall. This is one of the ways St. Thomas Aquinas argues for God's existence. In other words, whatever is set in motion is put in motion by something else.
Okay, we're going to keep that rule in mind. Whatever is set in motion is put into motion by something else. That rule has to be consistent, otherwise you're doing special pleading.
Things don't just move on their own.
Things move if they move at all. They can move because of gravity. So is that moving on their own? And what things are you talking about? Are you talking about things here on Earth?
A ball doesn't throw itself, but requires a thrower to move, just as a plane needs a pilot to fly.
Actually, these days, planes can pretty much fly themselves, but...
What is motion? Motion is going from potentiality to actuality.
Is it, though? I mean, that's one version of motion.
Potentiality is having the potential to be X, and actuality is actually becoming X. For example, my morning coffee is hot, but my coffee is potentially cold. And if I put my mug in the refrigerator, it will actually become cold. Something cannot go from potentiality to actuality by itself. In other words, it's impossible for something to move without being put in motion by something else.
Not necessarily. In quantum physics, that doesn't necessarily hold true because of superposition. And of course, when you get to the Planck temperatures that would be present in the early stages of Big Bang cosmology, such temperatures negate cause and effect potentially completely. So, no, you're wrong, but keep talking.
This applies to creation.
If you say it's creation, then you've already assumed your conclusion, which is a logical fallacy.
Things are constantly moving and changing, but none of these changes happen by themselves. If you search for the first cause and keep going back far enough, you will conclude that there is a mover that was not moved by another.
No, you won't. Unless that's your conclusion that you want to reach. To assert that there's a mover automatically anthropomizes the thing. And so there's another fallacy that you've already committed, but you're now just committing it again, which is assuming your conclusion.
That is, Someone outside the series of motions put everything into motion. This is the only logical explanation for how the series of motions began.
No, it's not the only logical answer. And in fact, it's not even an answer, nor is it necessarily logical. For it to be logical, you must demonstrate logically that it is possible, let alone that it actually is, which you haven't done. You're just asserting that it's the only logical thing, which you haven't demonstrated. This is a failure to give an argument, which is a formal fallacy.
The first mover cannot be part of the series, or there would be nothing that could explain his motion.
Okay, so then the rule that we had that something has to cause something else doesn't apply to the first mover. Thus, you need special pleading for the first mover, so another logical fallacy. That's 3 logical fallacies required for your argumentation thus far. Not looking good.
In the case of dominoes, it would be the person who knocked down the initial domino.
Or the force, like wind. If wind knocked down the first domino, is that because the wind wanted to knock down the first domino? Or is it just a force of nature, uncontrolled by anything else? The problem is that if you propose a thing that can push over a domino, and that thing has intentionality behind it, then isn't everything caused by that thing? So that even the domino being pushed over is ultimately caused by the thing that isn't me, but the thing that made it possible to push it over? And wouldn't that be a problem in your argumentation to some degree?
And in the grand scheme of things, the first mover is God.
Or so you say, but that's not what follows. It's interesting to me that you're not presenting Aquinas' argument in the way that he framed it. But he did frame it using rather bulky language. But your framing of it actually makes his argument even worse than it already was. That's pretty bad. Just, wow. You've made his argument worse by framing it in the way that you did. But by all means, continue.
Second proof, causality. The second proof, similar to the first, is about the cause or creation of things.
Basically rephrasing everything that you already said in a new way. This is Aquinas' trick. He just reuses the same argument 5 times.
Everything needed to be as it was for things to exist, therefore it happened. It just happened. I don't know if you've heard about the Big Bang Theory, but that is the...
Yeah, so what constituted the bang?
Okay, so the moron that you're presenting against in this video, I don't know who this is, but he obviously doesn't understand Big Bang cosmology, or he wouldn't ask about the bang, because that's just the name of it. There wasn't a bang. So moronic idiot isn't an argument in your favor.
Yeah, so gas is something, right? So it didn't come from nothing.
Nobody claims that it did come from nothing. That's your assertion.
Nothing can create itself. That is, nothing is the cause of its own creation. It would be ridiculous to think that a car created itself.
No one posits that nothing created anything. That's a theist position, not an atheist position. I already made a video showing several atheists that do not believe the universe came from nothing.
It's important to note that a cause answers the question, why?
No, cause doesn't answer the question why. Other additional questions must be asked to potentially answer the question of why, but why may or may not be relevant and also may or may not be findable in the first place. You're just asserting things without any argumentation. Another example of the formal fallacy, failure to give an argument. Just provide your argument.
Such as, why is it warm outside?
Because there's a sun.
Because of the sun. In a similar way, the car was created or caused by the workers who made it. The same applies to you. You weren't the cause of your existence. You didn't create yourself. You came from your parents from your grandparents, and so on. This series of causes cannot be traced back to infinity, or else we would have no explanation of how we got to where we are in the first place.
Okay, so if it did in fact go back infinitively, as far as we could tell, now there's problems with this statement because many reasons, but let's just say that it seemed that we had an infinite chain of humans going back as far as history went back, that was our archaeological discovery, that we didn't find suggestions and proof of biological evolution as we understand it today, but instead found human, no matter how far back we looked. And that no matter how far down we dug, we would find more humans. And we also found examples that humans existed in outer space because we saw bodies, tons of, well, I guess skeletons in outer space, being left in giant trails made by the Earth as it moved about its celestial wanderings around the universe. And as far as the eye could see, we just see a chain of humans going on and on to what seems like forever. But we couldn't say it's a true infinity. We'd say it looks like infinity, but the problem is we could never know that it was infinity, even if it was infinity. But we would have an answer. We wouldn't have the complete answer. We'd say, well, there's a chain of humans as far as the eye can see, and we don't know when or where that started or why. Or even if there was a start. It seems from our observations that it just keeps going on and on. See, the world is stacked on top of turtles. Now, what's holding the turtles up? Well, turtles. But what's under the turtle? Another turtle. But how many turtles are there? It's turtles all the way down. Of course, we all know as lobsters that that's the evil satanic version of reality that those evil turtleists wants us to believe. The actual answer is that Earth is being held very carefully in the pinchers of the giant lobster original deity that's spinning us constantly. What? That's not how anything works? Look, no, it does. Look, I have proof. See? This thing says logic rocks, and it's a lobster, so that proves it.
Place. Logically, a first cause must exist to explain all subsequent causes.
No, not necessarily. It could be an infinite chain of regress. If that's what the data showed, then that's what the data showed. Now, in our case, we don't have data that shows that. Instead, we have data that shows the beginning of life at abiogenesis, and for the cosmos, we have what's called the Big Bang or Big Bang cosmology, and those are things that are very separate from anything that you're saying here, but you don't want to get into the details, I guess.
And this first cause would be God.
And that's an assertion that isn't supported by your argumentation even a little. You haven't established God as a thing. You're just asserting it as your thing. Everything has a cause, therefore God. Everything has motion, therefore God. But there's no premises here. You don't even have an argument. So you've taken the idea of St. Thomas Aquinas's arguments and you've removed the argument part. You know, the most important part of an argument. So by doing that, your entire thing isn't even an argument anymore. It's just a bunch of words. Wow. You guys are students? What the hell are you learning?
Third proof, contingency. We are not self-sufficient, but rely on other things for our existence. We are contingent. Just as a tree depends on sunlight for its existence, and the sun relies on nuclear fusion and hydrogen, we also depend on other beings. We rely on water, plants, and animals for food. Without these things, we would not exist. Every existing thing depends on some other thing for its existence.
Okay, so that's a rule. Everything that exists requires something else for it to exist.
In the end, if you trace everything back, you must conclude there is something that is not dependent on anything for its existence.
So there isn't actually everything requires something else to exist. It's that 99.99 things require something else for them to exist, but one thing doesn't. Special pleading again.
Because if there were no independent being, everything would be rootless and unexplained. And this
That's an appeal to consequence, and even if true, doesn't negate anything at all. So, another fallacy. Wow.
independent being is God.
And you just asserted that without any actual argumentation.
God's very essence is to exist.
How do you know that?
Before creation, it was just Him.
So God breaks the rule of needing other things to exist. Why?
He does not rely on us, the angels, or anything else for His existence.
Okay, cool. So then why does God need me to believe in it? Why is that so important for God? Unless it's not actually about God, it's actually that the religion needs me to believe in God so that I join the religion and contribute money to the religion.
Fourth proof, degrees of perfection.
Wow. So, okay.
We compare things all the time, such as this food is saltier than that food, or this church is more beautiful than that church.
Well,
But what is this objective standard of saltiness or beauty?
it isn't an objective standard. It's a subjective one.
With the example of the church, what is our standard of beauty from which we
It's subjective. It's your own standard of beauty.
can say an object is pointing towards or away? Or what is the maximum standard of beauty from which I can say this church is either pointing towards or going away from?
There isn't one.
When I say this church is more beautiful than that church, I'm saying this church reflects the ultimate standard of beauty more perfectly.
No, you're saying that you prefer one church over the other. It's completely subjective.
In the case of saltiness, things can be more or less salty. French fries can be saltier than pizza. And salt is the cause of all things that are salty. Because if salt didn't exist, we wouldn't be able to say that some things are saltier than others.
Don't ever go to this school. Don't go to the school that they're going to. Don't do it, or you'll wind up sounding this stupid.
As things resemble salt more closely, they achieve greater perfection on the scale of saltiness.
As they get what? There's a scale of saltiness. The flying fuck.
The most salty something can be is salt itself. Pure salt is
So you're my example of the dumbest argument ever. And the closer we get to you, the closer we get to the dumbest argument ever. I kind of like this idea. I might use it in future videos. You are now my example of the dumbest thing ever. Thank you.
Is the most perfect saltiness that something can be.
And so if we can find the most evil thing possible, then, well, we've found the maximally most evil thing that there could be. Now, how do we know that's the end of the line and there's not something more evil? Well, I can save you the trouble. It's my ex-mother-in-law. But no. Actually, no, yeah, that is the most evil thing. But also, maybe there's something. No, that's the most evil thing. There isn't anything more evil than that. No, that's so. But this is silly.
Now, there must be a maximum ideal of perfection, a perfect being that accounts for the degrees of perfection in all things.
So if something's imperfect, would that point to an imperfect being that's the most imperfect being that ever could exist? If ugliness points to the most ugly being that ever exists, the most angry being must point to the most angriest Hulk ever. The darkest version of dark must point to absolute darkness. This doesn't work. Not even a little.
There must be a perfect being of immense grandeur, which is the cause of all perfection. And this is God.
What perfection? Where? Where's this perfection? Is it just God, or are other things besides God perfect? Is God able to make anything non-perfect? And if so, why would it?
Fifth proof, finality. Nothing exists without a purpose.
No, lots of things exist without a purpose. So that's just wrong.
A thing is complete once it has achieved or fulfilled its purpose.
How do you know? What purpose does this serve? It's a brush. It brushes stuff. But after it's done brushing stuff, its purpose is fulfilled, so then it disintegrates, right? Because we all know that brushes only exist to fulfill their purpose. It's completely and totally subjective and without any actual coherence to any of this.
A chair, for example, is made to sit on.
A chair could be made to look at. So that's just, it could have multiple. What?
Once a chair is used, you can say it fulfilled its purpose. Now, humans have intelligence and act for an end. Eternal happiness in heaven is our ultimate goal.
You'd have to prove that heaven is a thing, and also you'd have to demonstrate that that is our ultimate goal, and you haven't done either of these things, so this is mere assertion. So this is just outright more logical fallacy. In this case, it is just bald assertion, just saying stuff. I can say stuff too, doesn't make it true. What's the purpose of your nose? Oh, it smells things. Okay. What's the purpose of your eyebrows? Oh, they block dust from getting in your eyeballs. Or it's just, what's the purpose of viruses? Well, they screw things up. Why? Well, because
However, there are other things that lack intelligence, yet act for an end. For example, the finality of an acorn is to become an oak tree. It fulfills its purpose once it becomes an oak tree. It does that naturally by virtue of what it is.
All right, so if my purpose is to supposedly be in heaven, then there's nothing I need to do because I will eventually achieve that purpose on my own without having to actively change my ideas at all. I won't have to believe in God in order to fulfill my purpose, unless indeed my purpose isn't actually to believe in God or land in heaven as a result of my belief. But that would kind of ruin your theology, wouldn't it?
The acorn doesn't think, oh, I need to become an oak tree. St. Thomas says, whatever lacks intelligence can only act for an end if it is directed by something which has intelligence.
But that's not true at all. The acorn has no intelligence and doesn't know that it will become a tree, and it might not become a tree. So does that mean that an acorn that doesn't become a tree, it's just... What is this? That's a good question. This is a bunch of nonsense. This is what this is.
For example, an arrow's purpose is to hit the target. How does it
An arrow's purpose is to hit the target? Really? What if the arrow's purpose is to be an art display? Or whatever. It's just so silly. It's just...
attain that purpose? Well, it can't do it on its own. The arrow requires an intelligible thing, or an archer, to move towards its end. An arrow exists to hit the target.
Okay, so what purpose does horrible, terrible diseases serve exactly?
In the same way, an acorn exists to become an oak tree.
Also, I love that they put this nice little happy music underneath because they know their argument sucks so much that it needs happy music.
If there were no ultimate goal or purpose in things, then everything would be for nothing.
Wow, what an appeal to consequence. A rock sitting there in the woods. Is it ultimate purpose? A bear comes along and scratches itself on the rock. Oh, that must have been the ultimate reason why that rock was there. But the rock stays there in the woods, century after century, just sitting there, even though it fulfilled its purpose. Why doesn't the rock just melt away? This is just pattern seeking. This is desiring that things have purpose, even when they don't necessarily have any purpose at all. Any and all purpose that you apply to things is completely and wholly subjective in nature for the most part. I mean, I suppose there might be a few counter examples to that. But to conclude that, well, if everything doesn't have a purpose and it's all for nothing, doesn't actually work either. Because you're just asserting that as your own conclusion without any argumentation for it. There doesn't have to be a purpose for anything at all, but everything might matter very much to those of us who care about stuff at all. So even if I don't have a cosmic purpose in the way that you frame, I still matter to the people that I matter to. And that's enough for me. That it's not enough for you, well, that's a you problem. But none of this is an argument for anything other than you just want things to matter a whole lot. And if they don't, then it must not matter at all, which is an appeal to consequence.
St. Thomas also says, therefore, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed towards their end.
Yeah, and St. Thomas Aquinas was wrong.
And this being we call God.
Well, no, you guys call it God. I don't.
Now you know how to defend your faith and stump an atheist with good arguments. Keep up the good fight, and Godspeed.
No, you don't know how to defend your faith, and you certainly don't know how to stump an atheist with good arguments, because all these arguments are bad. But here's a question for you. why do you need to stump atheists? Why can't you just present God to the atheist? In the same way that we can present any other thing to others and they can know what it is. So I say, hey, look, here's a thing. What is this thing? Now, somebody out there is going to know what this thing is and be able to explain it, its functionality, and what it's used for, and what it's called, and its measurements, and all of those things. And even if you don't know the name of this thing, you can describe it. And you now believe that this thing is a thing because I showed it to you and you could see the thing. And if we were there with each other, with you in the room, I could put that thing in your hand and you could examine it closer and you could put a microscope on it and you could weigh it and you could taste it and smell it and poke it against you and you could tell all sorts of things about it. But your God is that, nothing. It is a non-thing that you can't show anyone. There isn't anywhere I can look that is God. There isn't anything that I can hold that is God. There isn't anything that I can smell that is God. There isn't anything that I can weigh or detect at all that is God. God is completely and utterly unprovable by any stretch of the imagination other than the imagination of those that believe in God already. The atheist doesn't believe in God because we lack the evidence of God that we have for everything else. Everything else. There isn't a thing that lacks evidence that we believe in other than this God thing. Well, no, there are things, and there are multiple things, but this God thing is this thing that people have made up. It's like superstitions, like the number 13 is unlucky, right? Trichnophobia, I think it is, or trichnophobia, or something like that. Fear of 13. And so hotels won't have a 13th floor, even though they do have a 13th floor. They'll just relabel it 14, or they'll use that for storage because, And then the number 6 or whatever it is scary in whatever language, and so they don't use that. All these silly things. All these silly things that people believe in based on absolute nothingness. You break a mirror, 7 years bad luck. Why 7? Why not 6? Why not 1? Why not 7 days of bad luck? Why bad luck at all? A rabbit's foot is lucky. Not for the rabbit. And if it was, then why aren't all feet of the rabbit lucky? Why isn't the entire rabbit lucky? Horseshoes are lucky. Why? Are they lucky when they're on the horse? Then isn't the horse the most luckiest thing of all? How does any of this work? The answer is none of it works, because superstition is just belief in nothingness. It's nonsense. It is magical thinking. Step on a crack, break your mother's back. It's a rhyme, but it's not true. Otherwise, you could demonstrate that it was true. And you can't. This sort of magical thinking that you must engage in to believe in certain things is present in religion. There's a God. There's an afterlife. There's a heaven. There's a hell. There's angels. There's demons. There's a devil. Why? Why are there angels? What would God need with angels? Isn't it all powerful? The word angel means messenger. Why does God need a messenger? There's a movie called Dogma. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. And if you have watched it, might be time for a review of it, because it's pretty cool. And in Dogma, God needs a messenger because God's voice makes people explode. I have a question. isn't it God? Can't God just make it so that people don't explode? Nope, apparently not. In that movie, Adam, the first Adam, exploded when God tried to talk to it. So then it was like, oops, and made a thing to talk for it. Because it couldn't just make Adam so that Adam wouldn't explode when hearing God's voice. Because God just couldn't do it. That's just how it is. There's certain things God can't do. And even in theism, there are things that God can't do, apparently. God can't sin. Why? Because it just can't. So God can't know what it is like to sin because it cannot do that action. So how can it hold us accountable for something that itself can never do? It can't know what it is to sin, but it's so perfect that it can't be around sin. Why? Then why make anything that has the ability to ever gain the property of sin, whatever that is? But God is limited in all sorts of ways because theism says so. But is there any proof that God is any of these things? Nope. Is there any proof that God is anything at all? No. God is an object of the mind. It is something that we humans came up with. To show that it's more than that would require a demonstration of some sort. And since you apologists don't have any empirical evidence or repeatable tests for God, you rely on argumentations. And your arguments are all broken. These arguments were full of logical fallacies, and I pointed them out. Special pleading several times, bald assertions, and then formal arguments like just failure to give an argument in the first place. Simply just saying stuff without demonstrating anything about it. God is the unmoved mover, but is not moved itself. Why? Because it is. Because it has to be. But why does it have to? Because I said so. But it's able. Why does it break the rules? Then there isn't a rule then. Either there is a rule or there isn't a rule. You can't have it both ways. And so these arguments fail on a logical level. But they're presented as if they are logical arguments. But in order to know whether an argument is valid or sound, you need to know how to analyze argumentation, which means you need to know informal and or formal logic. And apologists don't seem to know that. I mean, maybe a few do, but these guys doesn't look like it to me. Because they took Aquinas' arguments that are actually laid out with premises and got rid of the premises, making them into nothingness. They're not even arguments anymore. Wow! Well done! You did my job for me. There's nothing for me to debunk because there's nothing here. You haven't proven God, and you definitely haven't stumped the atheist, whatever that means. I'm not worried about being stumped, by the way. There's plenty of things I don't know anything about. That doesn't mean that God exists. And also, I don't need to know what the answer is to know what the answer is not. Off the top of my head and without a calculator, I have no idea what 47 to the power of 5,017 is, but I know it's not 0. It's not a negative number, and it's going to be pretty darn big, but I have no idea what the number is. I don't know if it's even or odd. I have no idea unless I put it in. And probably a calculator would break because that's a really big number, but maybe somebody can find out the answer and post it in the comments below. But nonetheless, I know that the answer isn't 0 or a negative number. I know that. I also know it's not a fraction. So there's many things I know without knowing the answer. And as far as your version of God goes, or any God at all, these non-arguments that you presented are so weak and watered down from the original version that not only should they never stump an atheist even a little, they're not even going to concern the atheist for the most part. Again and again, I noticed in your comment section, most people accusing you of God of the gaps. And to be honest, that really does boil it down pretty darn well. Your whole presentation is nothing but God of the gaps. And honestly, when we analyze apologetics, it does seem to always boil down to God of the gaps ultimately. You don't know how X works, therefore God. You didn't use reason, not even a little, because nothing you said was reasonable. You just asserted things without any foundation for doing so. You showed no justification for any of your ideas to be true, and when you asserted a rule, you then broke your rule immediately after. You engaged in multiple logical fallacies, and because of that, we have to be skeptical of your conclusion. And in this case, because you didn't even show us an argument in correct format, we need to not believe you at all. You failed at failing, but you didn't win either. You just didn't even do anything. But I spoke about it because you're now my example of the dumbest video of all time, which I can measure other dumb videos against. And we'll see if they measure up to your level of dumbness. But if they surpass your level of dumbness, then I guess that will make them the new objective standard of dumbness, because that's totally how things don't work. All right, well, there you go. So, what is a TFP? Totally fraudulent preacher? Probably. So that's all we've got for now. Me and that guy right there. That's the other person. Right there. That guy. And that guy. And that dude. Hey, that sure looks like infinity, doesn't it? Didn't they just say that infinity couldn't be a thing? When I do this, right, then the other me is doing that, and the other me is doing that. But what started that? Like, did I start that? How does that work? Okay, so, like, the thing in my arm, right, goes to my brain, right? But then in my brain, like, there's a thing that says, hey, arm, do that. But I'm not really, like, telling my hand to do that, but I am telling my hand to do that. But then before that thought happened, what happened to make that thought happen? Was that God or was that me? And if it's me, then I am the mover that moves the things that are unmoved, which makes me God. Or is it only your God if you make the universe? I don't know. None of this works, and none of it's logical or reasonable, even a little. So I guess we have to be skeptical until next time. And after next time, we should probably stay skeptical. And Brother James says hi, just as I'm about to sign off. So, hi and bye. But if you want to go on live with me, email me, deconvertedman1@gmail.com, and we'll set up a thing to talk live. That applies to everybody and anybody, really. Because, yeah, I like talking to people and talking at people and responding to stuff and analyzing things for fallacies and doing the thing that I'm doing. All right. And that's all for now. Goodbye. And peanut butter. Peanut butter's purpose is to be peanut butter.